You hear guys all the time saying break down water, break down water. I was just kind of like, what do you mean by that?
How do you discern carp versus walleye on a live scope? Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things for whether somebody's tournament fishing or just fishing for fun is knowing when to leave spots. Have you ever thrown at some fish though that you're like, I'm pretty sure this is a carp, but I'm gonna try and been surprised by it?
Yeah.
What's your favorite way to catch walleyes? What's your confidence, bait, presentation, technique?
I would say a bobber.
How do you use live scope if you're trolling or rigging? To the people who think it's cheating and think it should be banned, what would you say? What is up, Fisher people? We're back this week with another podcast, and we're talking with Brandon Van Dusen out of Minot, North Dakota. A bit of an up-and-coming AIM circuit, primarily walleye tournament angler. Although we did fish the NWT stop at Sakakawea last year, and we get into that a little bit. So in the first part of this podcast, we primarily talk about how Brandon got into fishing walleye tournaments, how the AIM walleye tournament thing works, and some of his experiences at starting an endeavor like this. Then later we start to get into how he developed his process of attacking tournaments, how he would pre-fish, how he would break down water on new lakes or lakes that he already knew, and how that would differ from tournament day fishing. And while this is obviously something that's valuable in tournament walleye fishing, it's also valuable for somebody who's just going out to a new lake or an existing lake and they want to learn more about how to break down the water and how to look for those fish that sometimes are known to move on us, those wily walleyes. And then towards the end, we get into a lot of forward-facing sonar discussion about how he got used to using it, how I got used to using it, what he uses it for, how he uses it specifically for tournaments, identifying walleyes versus carp or something you don't want to catch, and get into the controversy a little bit about who thinks it should be banned, why it should be banned, and he talks about the different presentations he uses with forward-facing sonar, some of which are not necessarily ones you would think of off the top of your head. Brandon's very passionate about the sport of angling and wanting to grow and become better at what he does. So if you're somebody who's looking to grow as an angler as well, I think you'll find this to be an extremely entertaining and insightful discussion. So without further ado, here's Brandon Van Dusen. So my first most important question is, are you Dutch?
Am I Dutch? Yes. My family name is Dutch. Yep.
Yeah, so am I.
It's awesome. There we go.
Very cool.
Probably related way back where.
Yeah, sometime along the line maybe. So we're both Dutch. Your name is Brandon. My brother's name is Brandon. I really want to get to know you better because we've talked a little bit here and there, and I get this sense that like we could probably talk about fishing for 5 hours if given the opportunity. That's the feeling I get. Hopefully it's the feeling you get. So this is a little selfish for me, but everybody else is going to hear it along the way too. So,
cool.
So if you had to say like your biggest connection to fishing right now, like you're a tournament fishing guy, right? That's kind of what you do.
Yep.
Do you fish more for fun? Do you fish more tournament stuff?
I would say for me, as of right now, it kind of felt like it's gone through stages here, but right now I think a lot of the fishing that I do, if it's not necessarily on a tournament day, if it's just me going out by myself, it's just to try to learn something, and so I'm not really worried about the numbers that I catch, or anything really like that. I'm just going out there to learn something new. And honestly, one of the things I like to do when I'm by myself a lot is, just try some stuff that's kind of off the wall, and fish some weird spots and some stuff that, you might not usually fish. So a lot of the time when it's just me, I might only go out there and catch maybe one fish or two fish a day, but a lot of the times they're better fish. And for me, that's a lot more rewarding than going after numbers at the time or
right.
For right now. So
yeah, and that was another big reason why I wanted to talk to you too, because like, I mean, obviously, like watching or listening to podcasts with like big name people like the Elleners of the world, whatever, like that's cool. It's insightful because they've done so much. Everybody knows them. They've accomplished so much. I think it's interesting. I think a big part of the reason YouTube is interesting, I think a big part of the reason people like to watch my channel is it's like people that are hungry to learn about stuff and are in that process of growth, right? Like, That's what I see you as. Like, when did you start fishing tournaments?
I started, I believe I would be going into my fifth season of AIM we're
Okay.
going into. So yeah, about 4 years now I've done the AIMs.
And I assume it's been a massive learning process for you. We'll get into that a little more. But so your main circuit that you fish is the AIM Walleye tournament, right? You're based out of Minot, North Dakota.
Yep.
And then kind of explain like what is it like fishing AIM tournaments? What is AIM? Some people probably don't know what it is.
Yeah. So the AIM series circuit is a 5 tournament circuit over the summer. And they do their best to try to, a lot of tournaments here in North Dakota, so you kind of try to find those dates where it doesn't run into other tournaments. And it's specific, or most of the states there, the tournaments are set up to be on a Sunday. And that reasoning is, so, if you, it's hard to get time off of work, to go, especially to go fishing. So,
Mm-hmm.
with that tournament being on a Sunday, a lot of times, it gives you that, for a lot of people, it's for sure you get that Saturday beforehand to fish. And it's a lot easier to sneak out, maybe for a half day Friday, or, whatever it might be, to be able to get a couple extra days in to fish. So that's one of the really big things that I've liked about the AIM, is just the timing of it on the Sundays. And we're trying a few different things here this year. I believe we're having a tournament or two on a Saturday, just to try to see if, maybe that brings up a little bit of numbers wise here in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
But another really big thing that I've enjoyed about the AIM is the catch, record, and release system that they
Yeah.
use to, give you your weight for the day. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things with that I like, but I would say one of the biggest things is, I believe, at least as tournament anglers, that, if I kind of look at going after these fish and chasing these fish, especially, on Lake Sakakawea, where a lot of guys in North Dakota here fishes, it's kind of like a privilege, I mean, it's not, the fishing that we have here it's not like that everywhere. The lakes aren't all like Sakakawea and work like that. So I think as anglers, we should want the best for where we're fishing, especially if it's your home body of water. And so being able to release these fish is big to me. And not that I necessarily think, tournament guys are going to damage or hurt these lakes, but I just feel, as, anglers, that should be part of what we do, is
Mm-hmm.
trying to give back. So I really like that. And I feel like it also kind of helps and holds people true and honest. And so I feel like there's a lot of integrity with that circuit. So it's been a great way for me to kind of step into the door and get to meet a lot of people and things like that. So I'm a big fan of AIM, big supporter of AIM, and will continue to do that.
Yeah, you can stuff weights down a fish when you're weighing them, but you can't stretch them out on a tape measure, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's and that's just, it's what you run into everywhere. You're just gonna have a few bad apples in there,
Mm-hmm.
and you just try to get those people out of there, as quickly as you can, and
Right.
make it as fair as possible for the entire field out there.
Right. So my understanding of AIM, I'm pretty sure there's I don't know if you want to call it like a division for each state, and then eventually there's like a national championship, right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so there's 5 tournaments total throughout, the spring to early fall there, and 4 of them are considered a regular season event, and then there's the 5th event, which is the championship at the end. And so with your first 4, to be able to qualify for that championship event, you've got to just fish 3 out of the 4, and that qualifies you for the championship event. And each event, you get points based off the place that you get and your weight difference from the leader. And so at the end of the season, you get to take your top 3 scores if you fished all 4 regular season tournaments, and then your championship score, points that you get for that, add that up. And if you're top 5 in points after the championship event, you make it to the national shootout. And if you finish top 5 in the event, you also get a chance to make it to the national shootout. And so
Okay.
that's 10 boats each state. And there's Minnesota, Wisconsin, and I want to say it was 2 years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, they started a rivers division, and I'm not 100%
Hmm.
sure if that's Wisconsin and Minnesota, or if it's just Minnesota. But so there's a fourth, so there's 4 total. So it's 40 boats. You get invited to this national shootout, and lots of sponsorships there. You know, good exposure. You get to meet a lot of great anglers. That was one thing for me that really kind of got me hooked on the aim, is we were fortunate enough to make it my second season, and so it was kind of like, you know, I wanted to get back there, you know, as much as I could. And so you're fishing, it's 40 boats, and the prizes you're going for, I believe it's a 19-foot Warrior boat, 200, 225 Yamaha on there, some Garmin electronics, and I think they throw you know, some rods and some tackle and stuff in there. So the total, I believe, that comes out to is maybe a little over 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's also a paid entry fee. Now that's probably the cheapest thing you pay for most tournaments. But I mean, you know, a paid entry fee, you only got, you know, 39 guys or 39 boats to go against, which, you know, are good anglers. But, you know, those are probably the best odds you're going to get for potentially winning that kind of
Mm-hmm.
money. And like I said, the recognition you get from that, you know, it could be a good career boost to you. You know, you do well in one of those, or win that thing. So
Right.
a lot of great opportunities there with AIM.
Yeah, and that's one of the unique things too. I think about, like walleye fishing, because there's when you talked about big names, like it's hard to make a living fishing. So there's plenty of, popular NWT National Walleye Tour guys that also fish AIM circuit tournaments, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Have you run into any of those guys?
Yeah. And it was, you know, we made the championship, which would have been for, you know, two previous seasons ago. We made the championship, which was this spring, on Lake Sakakawea. And yeah, I mean, it's a, you know, Eric McCoy, Tom Wynn, Hunter Nitty. And I mean, those are, you know, McCoy's got a couple NWT wins. Nitty just won the Angler of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume most people that follow walleye fishing have heard of Tom Wynn before. So yeah, I mean, that's just when you get to fish, at least for someone like me, you know, being next to those guys and fishing with those guys is it's pretty cool, you know.
Mm-hmm. You got any juicy stories of meeting any of those guys? Running into them on the
Um,
lake, anything?
no, nothing too. I might have fished a little bit too close to John Hoyer here in the NWT, and I kind of learned a lesson there from that. But other than that, no, that's about all I got for the juice fishing with those guys. I will say, um, you know, it was cool to see in that national championship this spring or last spring. Um, we didn't finish very well, but we were in the right area fishing, and you know, so we were right by a lot of those guys, and so it was, you know, it was cool to watch them fish and hear the reasoning for why they were in those areas and things like that. And I would say I learned a lot from, you know, this year's mistakes in that tournament. We ended up fishing, you know, McCoy won that thing back in, what is it, Littlefield or whatever, small bay back there. And
Ah,
I
yeah.
fished back in there, and I didn't find those fish, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to kind of take bits and pieces from those guys and figure out where you learn from and keep going
Mm-hmm.
was big for me this year.
Yeah, I remember the first experience I had with a big walleye tournament when the NWT was at Sakakawea in, I think, 2019. It was my first or second year guiding, and I got picked to drive the boat for one of the camera guys. So we were following some of those guys around, and I started seeing spots where they're fishing, and I'm like, I never would have guessed to fish there. And then once I
Right.
got there, I saw why. Stuff that's not on the Lake Master chip, stuff that was off the
Hmm.
map, and you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
that you
And
can always learn a lot of stuff.
yeah, and I think you know, we might get into it you know, a little bit later in this, but for the longest time, you know, when I would see guys fishing in, you know, those spots that were just kind of unusual, you know, to someone like me that maybe fishes the lake locally or quite a bit, um, I feel like through the way that a lot of these guys are, I'm assuming at least that they pre-fish, um, it kind of takes it doesn't seem so random, I guess, the way that I've kind of broken it down to where it almost makes sense that those guys are, you know, not necessarily the specific spot, but, you know, that they're fishing something that is completely random to someone that's maybe fished, you know, 5 years on a lake and they've never fished this area or something like that. So yeah, and it's and you know, Dewey won that tournament across from, you know, across from the state park, East End, you know, and most people here in the state would, you know, probably be shocked to hear that, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
Shell or, you know, west end of the lake
Yep.
didn't win it. So
Yep.
I think a lot of that goes to, you know, forward facing and all the stuff we've learned and are able to see with that.
Yeah, and you're talking about the NWT on Sakakawea this year, which was early August, right?
Yep, early
Yep.
August this year.
Yep. So I just to kind of close out some of that AIM stuff. So do you fish the same lakes in North Dakota every year? Does it rotate? What did you fish this year?
So they try to rotate it really, as much as we can to try to get a little bit of, diversity, but it's, sometimes you just got to go with what you got. And so in North Dakota here with, being able to have lakes that have, access to lodging and food and camping and bait, fuel, things like that, it can be kind of tricky. But last year we started out on the Missouri River here out of Bismarck, and then we went to Lake Audubon. After that, we had the national championship out of Newtown, and then we were Garrison. Finished the last, or let's see, Garrison. Yep, and then the last regular season event was out of Partial, beginning must have been close to the end of July, and then we finished the season on Devil's Lake, the championship this year, early September.
So you fished Sakakawea 3 times in that circuit, just out of
Yep,
different launches. Okay.
yep, yep.
Which doesn't really surprise me. I mean, if you're going to have a bunch of walleye tournaments in North Dakota, you probably have to go to Sakakawea more than once.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing with Sakakawea, and I'm sure a lot of guys probably wouldn't agree with me, but it's so big, realistically, I have no issues with having, boundaries on it sometimes. So, split that thing up, and it really fishes different, east end to middle lake to,
Yeah.
up in the arm, up in the river and stuff. So,
Yep.
um, I like it when they kind of put it on each ends, or if there's a boundary or something, it kind of challenges you a little bit more.
Well, again, it takes, sometimes the tournament's all about who made the run and who didn't, right? Whereas if you put some boundaries on it, you're all fishing the same area more or less.
Right,
You're
right.
not on top of
And
each other, but you got a 20-mile or a 40-mile stretch instead of 180,
right,
Yeah.
right. And 40-mile stretch is a long
Yeah,
stretch of lake, so
exactly.
that's still a long run if you went, all the way to the
Yeah.
boundary line as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a big lake.
So, yeah, you said you made the national championships. You've had some good tournaments. What was the most memorable tournament you've had, or your highest finish, or best tournament story?
Most memorable. I think it would probably be the second year that we did the AIM, we were going into the championship on Devil's Lake, which is a 2-day event. And the year before that would have been the first year we'd ever fished Devil's Lake. And I guess when I say we, I'm talking about my partner I fished with for the first. Now that I think about it, I'm going into my 6th year of AIM, so I fished it for
Okay.
5. So for the first 3 years, I fished with a good friend of mine, Dalton Walsh, and it was one of those where we were going into it. We weren't really in it for team of the year or points or anything like that. And our first tournament a year ago before on that, I think we weighed 7 pounds, and we were honestly pretty hyped up about that because that was our best out of our pre-fish days and our tournament day. And so going into it, we were pretty loose, and we ended up kind of stumbling on a crankbite back in Pelican,
Mm-hmm.
and finished third in that thing, and
Mm.
we made it to the national championship. And so I think for me was a really memorable moment and big moment for me in my fishing career, as far as it was that first moment of where you really kind of got some confidence as far as, hey, I can hang with these guys, or I can do this. So that was a big one for me. And those, the first 3 years that we did the AIM, I had only fished really, my parents have a place out of Douglas, so I'd only fished, you know, Douglas Bain a little bit out of the west part of the lake, out of the arm and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put a ton of time in trying to learn, the river, Audubon, different parts of Lake Sakakawea, Devil's Lake. We were just on the road, almost every weekend, just trying to learn and learn and learn as much as we could. And so you kind of hit that point of, is this working? Am I doing it right? And then, so, getting that and being able to go to a national championship for sure, gave me a big confidence boost going forward.
I sincerely appreciate you checking out the podcast, and if you had any desire to support the channel further, please go ahead and check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Bloemendaal Fishing. And if you're in the local Sakakawea area, The top 2 membership tiers also include extremely in-depth fishing reports to help get you on fish as fast as possible every time you go out. Again, patreon.com/Bloemendaal Fishing. Back to the podcast. As you mentioned earlier, we were going to get into a little bit of talking about pre-fishing. So like when you do fish a tournament, you know, some of those National Walleye Tour guys will go to a site for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or maybe longer than that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
AIM guys probably don't have as much time to pre-fish.
Right.
So how many days do you usually fish, and what are you trying to accomplish when you're pre-fishing?
So typically, I don't know. It just kind of all depends on how the schedule falls. A lot of the times I can get a Friday to get out there, you know, so you got a Friday, Saturday, and um, you know, it helps now being the, you know, fishing so many tournaments after 5 years where you don't feel like you have to be out there quite as much as you know, maybe were in the past. So I would say a lot of times 2 days, maybe 3 days, or, you know, if you can get out there that weekend before. So, you know, I would say anywhere but 2 to 3 days. Every once in a while you sneak out and you get a, you know, maybe a little bit longer, you get a Wednesday or something like that to go do it
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, but for me, I would say that's probably was the, and some you know, you're always kind of working on, but you hear guys all the time saying break down water, and time on the water. And for me, that was one of those things that I was just kind of like, what do you mean by that? You know, I spend a lot of time on the water, but you know, what should I be doing out there? Or, you know, as far as breaking down water, what does that mean? And so that's kind of been a big evolution of my game. And so when we started, Dalton and I started fishing the tournaments, you know, it was a lot of kind of throwing a dart on a map, you know, and just say, let's go here and let's go
Mm-hmm.
here and let's go here. And so it was just a lot of kind of running around, and, you know, we felt confident that we could put, you know, patterns together and things like that. But at the same time, we weren't doing what we needed to do to really figure some stuff out. And so kind of through a lot of trial and error and kind of getting smoked in these tournaments, I've kind of been able to build my own way of breaking down water. And that's one thing for sure I would recommend to any guy that's, you know, starting tournament angling or anything like that is breaking down water. And so the way I look at it in pre-fish is, number one, I try to go out there with, you know, whether it's something I've fished a lot, never have done it before, I try to keep, you know, all the emotions at the boat ramp. And by that I mean, you know, if maybe I have a, you know, I have a feeling maybe I want the fish here, I'd like to catch them on this, or I got info about here or there. I think all information is good information, but it just kind of depends on how you decide to use it. And so, you know, you're just trying to cross stuff off that doesn't work, you know. And so you hear a lot of guys talk about, you know, you start out with 8 rods on the deck and you'd like to get it down to, you know, one or two, you know, kind of a 1-2 punch that you're confident with. You know, I've watched a lot of these podcasts, and, you know, a popular theme that I would hear a lot of guys say, especially, I think the first guy I heard say it, and I'm not quoting him on this, but Corey Springle I would hear him, you know, mention stuff a lot of the times about, you know, people would ask him day before the tournament, you know, what is your plan, or what are you going to go out there and do tomorrow? And he would say a lot, you know, I'm not sure. I got to wait and see what tomorrow looks like. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
fish the day. And
Yep.
so kind of listening to how he would look at fishing, and some of these guys nowadays, especially with the forward facing, is I kind of look at it as a numbers deal. And so if I can get my bait in front of enough of the right fish, I'm confident that if I keep continuing to move and go and go and go and cross off boxes and cross off boxes as I go, I will continue to get, you know, see better, you know, see what I want to see more fish. I used to kind of be worried about with that forward facing, you know, well, what if you miss something? You know what I mean? What if I go buy something and I don't miss it, and or I miss it? And I think one thing for me was, you know, trying to have that mindset of when I go out pre-fishing or when the tournament day comes, of not having this in your mind of, you know, hey, I caught a 28 on this point in 30 feet. That's where I got to go tournament day, because that's where the 28s are. And and so just, you know, having that open mindset. And I guess for me now, I would rather not catch a big fish like that. I'm not really looking for big ones or catch big ones in practice. I mean, obviously it's nice to, you know, that builds your confidence, but I'm really looking for large areas that have a certain type of structure. I like to fish shallow. That's kind of my thing. And so I'm
Hmm.
looking for shallow structure and, trying to find what these fish are relating to. And I'm looking for, large areas of that, large stretches of that. So when tournament day comes, I don't feel like I have to get to this, particular spot. I can just drive into this area. I know what it should look like in order for me to catch the right fish. And if it looks right, you fish it. If it doesn't, keep moving. And so a good example of that, you know, uh, starting the tournaments, it was probably, we'd fish maybe 1, 2 spots a day. And it was always stuff that we'd always fished. And this year, in the championship at Devil's Lake, really slow morning. We had, probably 7 or 8 areas that we were really confident in, and then we had, 1 or 2 areas that were kind of our money spots. And that morning, we had day 2, we had absolutely nothing. We had no fish, and we just kept rifling through spots. And like I'd said, we knew what the graph should look like if those fish were there, and we knew how
Hmm.
they should react to our baits. And so if when we would get into these areas that didn't look right, we'd pack up and go. So I think we fished, I think it was spot number 8. We finally caught our first fish, and that was about 11 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were able to put 5 together for, I don't know what it was, a little over 20 pounds or whatever, and kind of, match our day 1. But a good comment, that my buddy had said to me, was one, without forward facing, and two, just the way we used to fish was, we would have sat on those 2 money spots all day, and
Hmm.
you just waiting for him to go, waiting for him to go,
Yep.
waiting for him to go. I guess the biggest thing for me is just mental. It's fishing is so mental, and so if the more I can keep a clean slate, keep an open mind. I heard it from Jason Mitchell. Uh, Never say never and never say always.
Yeah.
And so, there's just a few things that I've heard, throughout my career of walleye fishing here that just stick, and
Yep.
you kind of replay them in your head throughout the day.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things for whether somebody's tournament fishing or just fishing for fun is knowing when to leave spots when things
Right.
have changed. Like I think that's something I've gotten better at as a guide and fishing for videos and stuff over the years is like when I show up to that spot where I crushed him yesterday, like you said, I know what the graph should look like. I
Hmm.
can be there for 5 minutes, maybe 10 and go, I know this has changed. I'm out of here.
Yep.
And that's so hard for people to do because they were stuck on what they were catching yesterday, but also they might not have a plan B.
Right.
That's their spot.
Exactly.
And you have to be. So it's cool to hear you say you had 7 areas in that tournament because sometimes I've always wondered when these guys are fishing tournaments. When I've watched, I mean, it's hard to know what you're seeing when you watch like the NWT breakdown
Hmm.
video of whatever, but it seems like in my mind, most of the lakes, they have like a spot or two and the fish were off today, the fish weren't there today, whatever. Whereas I keep thinking like a lake like Sakakawea, which I think fishes a lot differently, like you need to have so many backup plans.
Right.
And spots sometimes are kind of meaningless out there.
Hmm.
So there's definitely lakes that I think have spots that are,
Right.
I fish this little rock pile because this rock pile always holds walleyes, and those walleyes will probably be there for 3 weeks in a row in the middle of the summer because that's just what they do. But that's, to say that I can fish the same spot 3 weeks in a row in Sakakawea is a big rarity,
Right.
huge
Yeah,
rarity.
for sure.
But yeah,
And so for me, that's why I've kind of, when I'm out pre-fishing, you've obviously, like I said, the more bigger fish you catch, the more confident you're going to be going into it that you can go catch those fish again. But I guess for me, like you said, that we're fishing for walleyes, and especially if you're on a reservoir like Sakakawea, they move all the time, and they could be, you could have them dialed in an area, and you could go back the next day, and they are nowhere near. I mean, they're nowhere to be found. And so for me, instead of specifically looking for fish, I'm more so looking for structure that I'm confident will hold fish. So even, practice if I'm, going through an area and maybe I don't see them in there that day, or maybe, I miss a bite or whatever it is. It doesn't go my way, but I liked the structure and how it's set up. I might look for a couple sweet spots in there. So then, when tournament day comes, I can swing through there.
Mm-hmm.
and make quick decisions, and you're not necessarily tied down to one, like you'd said,
Mm-hmm.
one or two spots.
Yeah. And I'm also getting back into the like, being tied to a spot thing. I do think there are lakes when you're looking for big fish specifically, when you're talking about tournaments, that if you have a spot and the fish are still there, Devil's Lake being a great example, they're just all big fish. It's just a spot where
Mm-hmm.
a group or a school of big fish hang out. Sakakawea, to me, very rarely have I caught many big fish on one spot in the same day. Do you find that same experience? I feel like a tournament guy on Sakakawea, not only do they need 7 backup plans, I don't know that you can expect to catch more than 1 or 2 big walleyes on any given spot most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say, well, you know what? To be honest, I think so. We had a last year we had a second place at a partial, and we caught all of those fish. We were fishing some of the islands there up in the arm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now it was we fished the whole side of the island, but we did stay there that day, and we caught the aim scale's a little inflated, so it's probably, I don't know, 3 4 pounds or whatever over a live weight, maybe even a little bit more than that. But we weighed
Yeah.
for on the aim scale 31.5 pounds or something like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
this year, our tournament out of Garrison, we weighed on the aim scale 34 pounds for second, and that was out of a probably 200-yard stretch. Um, but I would agree with you on Sakakawea. Rarely do you find something that it's you just wheel in there and it's 28, 28, 28, 28, 28,
Right.
28. You know what I mean? It
Right.
just doesn't typically, like you said, work like that. For me, I've gotten more comfortable with just looking for bigger areas with the right structure that fish could be there or they might not. And I think one thing in pre-fishing, is a lot of guys will think, well, I caught a 28, so the 28 should be there. And a lot of the times I'll look at it, um, in a reverse, so you think those 28 should be there, and you go there and they're not, which probably happens more times than
Yes.
not that you go back and they're not there. But sometimes I look at it the other way, as if you're in an area that has really good structure, there's lots of bait, it sets up right, but those big fish aren't there, and you're catching a lot of small ones, especially on a lake like Sakakawea reservoir where these fish are moving. That could flip on you. So you could be there one day and it's all dinks, but you could, and maybe you X that spot out. But if you, like I said, if you paid attention to the structure and things like that, it sets up right. Those big fish, it could switch. Those little fish could move out and bigger fish come in that day. So I think that just goes back to fish in the day, and being clear minded.
Yeah, actually, the number of years that I fished the Kakawea now, like again, the more data points you get, the better you know something. But like, there was a handful of spots the first couple of years I fished there that I started in my mind thinking of as dink spots, because the first
Hmm.
2 years I went there was always fish there, but they were always small. And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, I decided to fish that spot the next year, and they were always nice fish.
Yeah.
So, like you said,
Hmm.
it's funny how that if it's a spot that likes to hold fish on Sakakawea, I think eventually there's going to be big fish there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that like stays in my mind a lot as well when I'm pre-fishing is trying to kind of think like a fish, or thinking how, what would they do. And so when you think of a fish, it's a it's an animal, or whatever. So there's three things it's doing, which is reproduce, which is done right away in the spring. So once that's cut out, all those fish on their mind is food and what I call, shelter or safety. In my mind, I don't necessarily think a lot of fish catches are random. You might catch one big fish here and there might not be a lot, but in my mind, that fish is, that fish is doing something there in that area. It's not just swimming around aimlessly. And so my kind of thought is just like you'd said with those spots with fish coming in and out is, it's is there shelter and is there food? And a lot of times I try to find, both of those close. And so even if the fish aren't there the day I check that, or it's a spot you run through day one on a tourney, I don't like to necessarily go back to stuff if I don't get them, but it's like I said, back to that open
Mhm.
minded of, you just never know if it sets up right, who knows what could happen in there. And I would with a lot of people that walleye fish, when you land on the right fish and they're going, there's no question. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's like, okay, we're on them. And
Yep.
so I essentially am just kind of, keep going and moving
Yeah.
until I find that.
That shelter thing you said is very interesting to me because almost everybody I know is trained to look for where are the walleyes feeding? Where's their food? What do you consider to be shelter for a walleye? Do you look
Um,
what are shelter spots for you?
I guess shelter for me would just be safety for them or something that, is comfortable for them. And so, like I said, thinking kind of like a fish or looking at the, the life that they live, when you're, 2 inches big or whatever in Sakakawea, there's a lot of danger out there. There's a lot of things
Yeah.
that are trying to eat you. And so, these fish that get, over 20 inches or whatever, that they're smart. They understand, they've learned for a long time of how to avoid danger, and they can, these fish can sense, well, I would assume they can sense, danger, or understand that, hey, something's off here. I don't like this. And so, to think of a fish that was this big to get to 28 inches, that fish has lived a long time and understood, you know if I want to stay alive, there's certain things that I got to do. And so you'll hear a lot, or I've heard a lot, guys will say, those something shelter for me would be like a real steep break, or something that's, easy deep water access, essentially.
Yep.
So that fish can come up, feed, and it can dip back off whenever it wants. It's real easy
Yep.
and slick. A
Yep.
lot of other things, are any sort of that structure, whether it's rocks or trees, shrubs, bushes, whatever it might be. It gives that fish a place to, you know, stay alive, essentially, take shelter. And, they're not eating obviously every second of the day. And so they gotta duck away in that time. So for me, if you can find, those two things close, that in my mind gives you, the best chance to be able to find fish. And I've had, not a ton of success, but kind of building off of that's worked for me.
Yeah. So I've talked in a lot of videos. I don't people might remember this about how there seems to be areas and depths that walleyes like to just hang out
Hmm.
because it's comfortable to them. And there seems to be areas where they like to feed. And the times when that can be confused, like a lot of people think of they hang out in the deep water and they come up shallow to feed at night kind of thing. But like in Sakakawea specifically, since we have rainbow smelt as the bait, which is very cold water fish, you can get into weird scenarios like in the fall, for example, when the smelt are in 45 feet of water and that's where the active fish are. And then the walleyes still love to hang out in that 25 to 30 foot of water, but it's so hard to catch them there. Do
Hmm.
you find it when you find fish in shelter spots, are they harder to catch than fish feeding near bait?
Yeah, for sure. And you like you explained it perfectly like that. Where you'll find fish, that maybe they look big or whatever. You'll see a lot of fish, but you just can't get them to eat.
Yeah.
Um, and so one thing I think that I've really tried to work hard on, especially using that forward facing, is just to forget about them. You know what I mean? And continue to look for, like I had said, that spot where I don't have to question it. And so that's kind of, another thing tied back to the pre-fishing is that's what I'm going for. So I would say for sure in the past, there was times where I'd get hung up and, I'd really try, for maybe an hour and a half or whatever to really try to get these fish to bite. And there's been a few times where, that's worked out for me, but at the end of the day, I know that's just not very efficient. And so, yeah, when I find those fish that don't go, I just try to, again, clear headed and just keep
Yep.
going until I find the area or whatever it is where it's not a question to me anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I keep coming back to that. Like if anybody asks me, would you rather change lures or would you rather move spots? I'd say 90% of the time it's move spots because I mean if
Yep.
you're fishing a lake that's a tiny little 300-acre lake and there's one little area that holds all the walleyes and that's where they are, that's the only place you can find them. Well, yeah, you got
Hmm.
to wait them out or you got to find something that'll trick them. But on a place like Sakakawea, just because you're marking fish doesn't necessarily mean you're in the right. But they're not biting. They got to be biting somewhere most
Right.
days.
Yep. And you
Keep
nailed it
moving.
right there. That's another thing that sticks in the back of my head. Being a tournament guy is somebody's catching them somewhere,
Yep.
and so just because your fish aren't going,
Yeah.
and there's times too where, it's just a tough day on the lake. But in the back of your
Mhm.
mind, you know someone's catching them good.
So just to kind of recap some of this tournament stuff, we talked a lot about pre-fishing. Do you fish differently on tournament day, or is it just another day of fishing for you?
that I would say that's a work in progress. So I've gotten a lot better at being able to, for sure, this season. Um, as far as my pre-fishing and breaking down water, I really, really, really tried to focus on, like I was saying, just looking for bigger areas and not trying to find this like spot on a spot deal
Hmm.
where I think I'm going to just catch, 5 8 pounders or something.
Yep.
So just try to keep moving. I guess that's the keep going back to that, but that seems to be the truth. And it's one of those where, I just feel as an angler, it's just you're just constantly taking in information, trying to kind of mold it into your own way, and then
Yep.
putting it to use.
So basically, is it fair to say, like in pre-fishing, you're doing more looking for spots, but once you've kind of built your milk run, tournament day, you're not looking for new things probably unless you get to spot 7 and they're still not there. Yeah.
Right. Yep, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, the practice, I would say I probably spend less time. I don't feel like I've gotten really confident at trusting my electronics and confident at what I'm looking at, and so
Hmm.
there's lots of times, or I shouldn't say lots of times, but there's times where you if it looks right to me, I whipped through there really quick. I just sped through there. It looked really good. Made a few casts, and they didn't really want to react to me. I just kind of throw it in my back pocket as a, chalk this up as spot number, whatever, in the order of, maybe how well you caught them or whatever. So um, it's pretty close to the same, but obviously, tournament day, one of the things with, kind of pre-fishing quick like that is you never truly know the potential of a spot until that tournament day comes. And so, good example was Garrison this year, the spot that we ended up catching all of our fish in for the tournament. Um, in pre-fish, 2 days before the tournament, we had caught. And usually, I don't like to hang around in areas too long. Like if I catch one or two, I'm kind of got a good feel for it. But
Yep.
we were fishing shallow, and the screen was just lit up, and so it looked like walleyes, kind of looked like some junk fish. We weren't really sure, and so we had caught a 24, a 21, and like a 17, and so it was
Hmm.
kind of iffy. We didn't really know, but there was so many fish hanging around in this area.
Hmm.
And so then we went back right at the end of the day, just checked it real quick. My buddy made one cast. There was a couple boats around, got bit, and we just intentionally bumped that fish off. And we're just like, okay, there's fish here. He was confident that it was a walleye. I trusted him. And so when we went back tournament day, you know, it wasn't one of those things where we thought, hey, we're just going to get giants out of here or all 24s. I just knew that there was that right class. The screen looked just like it should. The bait, the structure, everything set up right. And then when we got in there tournament day, we found out the true potential of that spot and caught some nice fish there.
If you haven't already checked out Tour Level Tom, a National Walleye Tour rookie experience on the Ripping Lips Adventures channel, do yourself a favor and check that out. If you've ever wanted to know what it's like behind the scenes at a professional walleye tournament, especially for someone new to the big national stage, I promise this will be an amazing watch. And now, back to the podcast. So we talked a little bit about live scope. Do you consider yourself to be a scoper? Is that all? Are you a pure,
Oh
I
yeah.
won't fish without live scope guy?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Easy answer to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm up at the front of the boat all day. That's what I'm doing, and I'm casting on them. It's tough to not to. Just as far as just how efficient you can really be. I kind of look at it as if you were fishing the same area as a guy trolling, and it's a tournament day and you're catching at the same rate, and let's say we get a shot at 50 fish or something like that. If I'm able to selectively choose, or let's say we each get 5 bites, right? And if I'm able to selectively choose the fish that I'm going to throw at, um,
Hmm.
I find that hard to beat if you're trolling or not, necessarily picking them out. I think it's just an efficiency thing, for me, especially doing the tournaments. And it's been really cool to um, just see those fish act and react, and the stuff that you can learn watching them. It's really cool, and I would think majority of the walleye game has really changed over the last couple of years, because it was you typically thought of these fish as bottom feeding and kind of lackadaisical and not real aggressive, and that was kind of what you thought of them as, and you had to have your bait on the bottom, all this yada yada. And with all this forward facing, it's almost flipped it to where they're not that, like, almost at all. And so I would say, nowadays when I'm fishing, I try not to target those fish that are on the bottom, because it just seems like they're not as active as those fish that are raised up. So
So and by not being on the bottom, so you saying that most of the fish you catch are suspended, would you say?
for sure, for sure,
Wow.
for sure.
Okay.
And that could
Interesting.
be, in deep water, shallow, you could be in 10 feet
Sure.
and that fish is, 2 feet off the bottom, or maybe it's halfway. But yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I would say way better catch rate, reaction rate to fish that are suspended up off the bottom.
So for Lake Sakakawea or any other lake that has billions of carp, especially when you're fishing shallow water,
hmm
how do you discern carp versus walleye on a live scope?
So for me, I am running Active Target 2, and I run that on a
Okay.
12-inch HDS Pro, Live Pro.
Okay.
Um, And so one of the big tells, couple of things for me, I guess, is one, typically for me, whenever I feel like I'm seeing carp, is they seem to really have a lot of movement to them. They seem to kind of be on the move. And typically they're on the move. Typically for me, there's multiple of them. There's, it's not just one that comes through there. If you're seeing them, you're seeing them. And especially if you see, a pack of like 3, 4 fish that look big and are just cruising along, for me, that's almost a guarantee, that it's a carp or something, that you're not looking for. And then as well on the active target, it seems like they don't, they're a big fish, but the return on them is just, for me, a lot of times if you get a good look at a big walleye, it's a really, really bright and, dense mark on there. I mean, it just
Hmm.
pops off the screen, and those carp, a lot of the times, they're not super bright like that. I'm not sure what that
Really?
comes
That's
from.
surprising to me.
Or maybe that's just a thing that I see, but
Yeah?
they kind of look a little faded out.
Huh?
They just look a little goofy. So for me, the biggest thing though is that movement. If they're
Hmm.
humming around, moving around, a lot of times that's my tell. And I've seemed to notice a lot of walleyes aren't, especially if they're feeding or eating or want to eat, they're not moving much. A lot of times you'll
Hmm.
just see them. They're just sitting there.
Hmm.
Um, and so to me, that movement is kind of is a big thing when you're out there fishing and trying to decipher different species of fish.
Have you ever thrown at some fish though that you're like, I'm pretty sure this is a carp, but I'm gonna try and been surprised by it?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Kind of right away when I started with that forward facing, is I never, the way I kind of taught myself how to do it was, simple 2D. And so if I couldn't see him on my 2D, I wasn't going to fish for him. And then, that kind of advanced into being able to read the side scan, kind of same principles, um, and same principles going into the uh, forward facing. And so right away, I remember it was a fall and I was out fishing, and I was fishing out, pretty deep, probably, 35, 40 feet or whatever, kind of your typical fall pattern. And I just remember seeing these fish up shallow that, they look big, but I wasn't sure what they were. And I'd never really fished shallow in the fall much. And, so I was kind of like, it's got to be a carp or whatever, and I
Yeah.
wasn't super proficient at reading my graphs exactly. And so I remember chucking a, big number 9 jig wrap, almost up onto the beach, ripping it back a few times, wham. And I'm like, no way. There's just no way. And there was walleye, and it was a walleye. And so
Hmm.
I think part of that kind of goes hand in hand with that, with the pre-fishing, as far as like, if a spot's going to hold fish and it's a good spot, there's most likely going to be a lot of fish in general in the area. And so in the past, if I would see a lot of, I guess carp is kind of, I'm not going to go in there. That seems to kind of spook everything away. But if I'm catching a lot of, like I see a lot of white bass or,
Yeah.
just whatever, if there's a lot of commotion in that area, there, it's for a reason. Like I,
Hmm.
had said it before, they're eating or, in my mind, shelter or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
sometimes I don't necessarily look for that, but I do like that, like seeing a lot of action in an area.
Yeah, for sure. Especially on, if it's a lake like Sakakawea that has a lot of diversity in terms of species, especially in the spring, when every fish is looking for warmer water, you can find almost everything in the same spot. But then there are other times where, yeah, if you catch two or three or four white bass or something else, it's like, that's all that's there. I find that normally to be like more summertime when
Hmm.
fish start doing some different things,
Right.
but that's not always the case by any means, for sure. So obviously you are pro live scope. If someone were to ask you, what's your case to the people who think it's cheating and think it should be banned, what would you say?
Um, a lot of things I could say, but I guess the biggest thing is I just feel like there's a lot of misconceptions with it. Just as far as a lot of things that we talked about here is, okay, I can put this sonar down and I can use it, but if you're not necessarily efficient at being able to decipher what you're looking at, and also not you know paying attention to the amount of time that you're fishing on certain fish, whether they're the right fish or not.
Mm-hmm.
um, it can really hurt you almost, I feel like, more ways
Yep.
than it can actually help your game,
Yep.
because you get into situations where, like I had said before, maybe you're and like you had said, maybe you're fishing on a bunch of carp that look like walleye for 2 hours, and you don't know. Or maybe because you see a spot or an area that has a bunch of fish in it, and maybe you did catch one nice fish or whatever. If you're just, going out and looking for a limit, you might get stuck on some of this stuff because you see them on the graph. And so there's a lot of different ways and avenues that you can get yourself stuck with that. And then the other thing I would say is, just because you see them doesn't mean that they're going to bite or
Yep.
eat, you know?
Yep.
And so when I first purchased the active target, I had a buddy who had used it a little bit, and he said, I was obviously really excited for it. And he said, just wait until you see how many fish don't eat.
Yeah.
And, that part of it, I think, is where, you get the separation and you've really, I think, you've seen kind of in the walleye industry kind of a few names kind of being able to rise, and I feel like it's allowed for more consistency for the guys that have put a lot of time into it. I think um there's only a handful of those guys that have won, I believe, more than one NWT event, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those have came in the last handful of years here, especially when this forward facing has come out, and so I believe that just gives you a big chance to you can take your game really anywhere with this thing. So that's for sure a benefit.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's one of those where if you're not using it right or trying to be efficient,
Yeah.
it's something that almost slows you down and snags you up,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
more than anything else.
That was definitely my experience the first few weeks that I tried to use it, for sure. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is I had read your interview after one of the AIM tournaments at Sakakawea. I think it was when you finished second or third. I think it was second place. And you talked about the fact that you were slow trolling creek chubs, but I presume you were using live scope. So I think a lot
Yep.
of people think about live scopers as being casters. How do you use live scope if you're trolling or rigging?
Yeah. So I guess the way that we use it, we've done that for a couple tournaments here. If that's what the fish are eating, I'm not against, I guess, fishing other ways. You know what I mean? If
Mm-hmm.
if something else is working, it's working, and I'm going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, that day, we had found a good bite on jigs, and they just weren't. We just couldn't get them to go pitching on them, and so we had some chubs dragging out off the side of the boat and had got one bite doing that, and they wouldn't bite the jig, so we went to four, and it worked out. But the way we like to use it is just put it in the forward mode, and depending on the structure and what you're fishing, typically I'm looking out anywhere from 80 to 100 feet, or I'll shorten that down if I'm in some really thick structure where I'm kind of trying to peek into some stuff. But we just use it to kind of see where those fish are at, and so I think that you can, a lot of times when you're trolling, you get this line, and these fish will bite in this same, every time we go over this mark, we get a bite. Every time we go over this mark, we get a bite. And so I feel like with active, you can kind of manipulate that to where, one, whether if that's just a school of fish that's kind of hanging out there, you can make sure, hey, instead of going, you know 200-300 feet and then turning around, we're just going to whip around, right away, and we're just going to hammer this.
Got it.
Or you can use it, to see where those fish are moving. Like we've talked about, they're always on the move, and so we just kind of use it as a way to look for them, look for the right ones. If there's a lot of fish in the area, tell what's bigger and what's not, and then just use it to
Mhm.
kind of drive over them. And so one of the tournaments we had, when we were fishing up in the arm and did pretty well, it was, we were fishing the steep side, and these fish really weren't on a single depth. And so we would, it'd be like, hey, there's three nice ones up in 15, reel your line up a little bit. We, go up into 15 feet, go over them. You're kind of panning. Okay. Hey, down at, 25 feet. So I think that day we were anywhere from, 8 to 25 feet of water, just trying to
Mhm.
run down bigger schools of fish. And so,
Mhm.
if we weren't using that, we probably would have, still caught fish,
Mhm.
but there's no way we could have been um, that efficient. And
Mhm.
one thing I would say is, I've got some buddies that, and friends and just people that I know that, might not want to jump into the live scope because people think, or the forward facing, that, if I put it on my boat, now I have to pitch jigs all the time. And
Mhm.
or just pitch on them, and it's not that at all. It's essentially
Mhm.
just another tool in the box for you. So
Yep.
if you're really good already at, whether it's pulling bait or whatever it might be, just because you throw that on the boat doesn't mean all of a sudden you have to change the way you fish. It's just
Mhm.
another tool for you. And so, just use it to your advantage.
Yeah.
And we fish spots too where, maybe the fish are up shallower or deeper and you get a lot of boat pressure. You can literally watch those fish slide out deeper, and you can be the first guy or maybe the only guy that picks up on that. And
Mhm.
it's all that efficiency. You just cut out an extra, maybe hour, half hour out of your day where you would have just been kind of driving around, because that's where they were, or where you were catching them that morning, whatever.
Yeah, right. So, live scope aside, like, what's your favorite way to catch walleyes? What's your confidence, bait, presentation, technique? If
um
they were going to bite one thing that you really like, what would it be?
I would say,
Or is it just whatever they're eating?
well, for sure, whatever they're eating, definitely on tournament day. um I would say a bobber. A bobber is
Huh?
probably, for me, one of the most exciting ways to fish. Now,
Huh.
it's not something where you feel the bite. So I would probably say, if I really wanted to feel a bite, I really like pitching a really light jig or something like that. But the bobber, to me, especially being able to use active, and you can kind of, it's not a throw it out there and we'll just wait and see. It's we try to use them. I think, guys call it power corking, or whatever it might be, but you pitch it the same way you would a jig, and you throw it on the fish. If it doesn't react or bite, you keep moving. But there's just something about watching that bobber, whether you see the fish on active or not, watching that bobber just, get dunked. Um, Especially if, I've fished them quite a bit, so I'm pretty confident in, just knowing the way that bobber, if it's a bigger fish or not. And so it's just kind of a unique feeling in fishing where,
Hmm.
you know, you can be holding a rod in your hand and get thumped, but that doesn't mean that fish is, hooked up or it's there. With that bobber, and you watch it going down, it's 100% there. Is it now? Do you set the hook and does the fish stay on? Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's that, excitement of, there's for sure a fish on there. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I like doing the bobbers, and like I said, with the suspended fish, there's just something cool about watching a walleye, either whether a fish goes down or up for something.
Yeah.
Watching them and seeing how curious they are is really cool to me.
Yeah, that's something I've wanted to do a lot more of is slip bobbering for walleyes, especially on Sakakawea, because that, to me, I think like 20 years ago, especially if somebody said I'm going to go catch walleyes and slip bobbers at Sac, they'd say you're crazy. But
Yeah,
a forward-facing sonar, being able to look for the fish and throw right at them. We might have to go fishing sometime. You might have to show me how to really slip bobber.
for
So I want to.
sure.
It sounds fun to me, and I've never really done it.
It's a lot of fun with the forward facing, and I think I would probably call somebody, unless you're fishing on a lake or small body of water, like you'd said, where I can drive to the spot and just chuck a bobber and wait, I'm going to catch them. But if you weren't doing that, I would call you crazy today if you were bobber fishing without forward facing,
Yeah.
you know, because it's a waiting game. So yeah, for sure. We got to get out there, do it, try it out. I've had a lot of success doing that over the last couple of years, whether it be with a minnow, piece of a worm, you know, on a
Yeah.
light jig or a small hook, whatever it is. Um, it works and it's a lot of fun. And like I said, there's to me nothing much better than watching that bobber just dunk and go down. So
Yeah.
for sure,
Well, I
my
look
favorite
forward.
way to fish.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to doing that next year at some point, whenever we can hook up. I appreciate your time.
For
I'm glad
sure.
you showed up. I'm glad we got a chance to talk a little more. It's been fun for me, and we're gonna wrap this up. Thanks, Brandon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brett. Appreciate you having me on, and yeah, keep in touch here. I'm gonna hang it up for the winter here. No ice
Okay.
fishing for me. We might be calling it retirement after this year, but yeah, looking forward to seeing you this summer and seeing what you guys can go do up on Lost Mountain Lake. So that should be a fun trip for
Oh
you guys.
yeah, there's a little hint for everybody.
Yeah. Oh shoot, I might have spilled the beans. I'm gonna have to cut that out.
No big deal. No big deal at all.
Awesome.
To be continued. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate
Awesome.
your time.
Thanks, Brett.
Later.
See ya.